Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new malicious compliance content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
First one is titled, Hurry Up and Keep Changing Your Tire? Okay. This was many years ago, but it sticks in my mind to this day. I was a contracted service provider, tow truck driver, for a major roadside assistance/travel organization, though the company I worked for was quite small. I had been sent to a lakeside neighborhood in my popular Northwest city, a neighborhood full of hip restaurants and cutesy boutiques, to change a tire on a new BMW. This was back when all cars had a spare tire, which should tell you how long ago this was. I had my own tools, but for the new BMW, it was always recommended to use the tools that came with the car, since they were less likely to cause damage. I had no problem with that, since the jack that came with the car was quite easy to use. It had a crank instead of a jack handle. The only issue was that there needed to be enough clearance between the jack and any nearby movable objects, such as, say, a curb. This particular vehicle was parked very close to the curb. My normal SOP is to ask the customer to slowly move the car away from the curb, to avoid damage to the rim of the flat tire. No one has an issue with this, normally. The chucklehead owner of the vehicle refused to move it, claiming that it was going to ruin the tire. I told him that if he moved it slowly, it wouldn't damage anything. He wasn't buying it. I pointed out that the tire was already flat, and likely needed to be replaced anyway, so no problem. He screeched at me, telling me to get on with it and change the tire, because he had places to be. So I got to it, wanting to be clear of this chump as quickly as possible. This car's jack had a very low gear ratio, requiring several turns to lift the car even an inch, but the force required to turn the crank was not excessive, enabling the user to quickly turn the crank until the car was raised sufficiently. The issue with the car being too close to the curb is that while the jack's crank has a hinge to fold it compactly when stored, the crank must be unfolded completely to provide adequate leverage to turn and lift the car. But with it so close to the curb, the bottom of the arc of the crank's movement caused the handle to just barely clear the curb. Only problem was that I was holding the crank as it came around to the curb. Not enough room between the crank handle and the curb for my fat fingers. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did skin 2 knuckles down to the bone, with the scars still present to this day. And yes, I did use some colorful, unprofessional language. Captain Chucklehead heard this and smugly announced that he was going to report my horrifying language and get me fired. He then reiterated his desire for me to get the lead out and finish changing the tire. Oh really? See, my first aid kit was back in the truck, several dozen yards away. Well, since I didn't want to delay this person's day any longer than absolutely necessary, I just continued to change the tire, splattering crimson jewels of blood on the rim of the flat, on the spare on the jack, on the lug wrench on the fender. I made sure not to waste a single cell on the ground. I even managed to get a nice, fat, drippy drop on the window. His face went pale as he saw the biohazard scene unfolding all over his precious car. I even made him sign the form with a blood-smeared pen, though I gave him the opportunity to get his own. After he nearly caused an accident leaving the parking space, probably on his way to the car wash, I was then able to tend to my poor, abused knuckles and get ready for whatever else the day would bring. Never heard a single squawk from my boss or from corporate. Duck that guy. Next one is titled, No Worries, I Got You Covered. This one happened when I was serving as a mechanic in the military. Our unit was deployed on a domestic op for disaster relief. We had about 90 vehicles that made the drive, and it took 3 long days of driving to get there. For anyone not familiar with old military vehicles from the 90s, they are definitely an uncomfortable ride and don't go very fast. Each vehicle had 2 assigned drivers that rotated at their own discretion. Anyone not assigned to a vehicle got to ride in comfort either in one of the charter buses, or there were a couple flights home. Both options were much more comfortable than driving. The day we arrived, a vehicle was brought to us with a broken rear window. Low on the priority list, but still not legally roadworthy. I tagged the side window with a grounded vehicle notice and took the universal key from the vehicle. All our vehicles of the same type have the same key style to switch on the ignition. The doors are never locked because key tracking with the amount of vehicles we have is non-existent, and there's always guards around the compound at night. I noticed the next day before lunch the vehicle wasn't in the compound but didn't think much of it. I knew it wasn't being worked on because it's a small shop and I manage shop flow. Over the next 3 weeks I noticed it was usually gone at lunch, but was always there when we were shutting the shop down in the evenings. I should mention the mess hall we were eating at was about a 15-minute walk from the compound. Once I noticed a pattern with this vehicle, I sat outside before lunch, puffing on a cigar and playing on my phone. I watched the drivers that dropped the vehicle off broken walk up to it, remove my grounded tag, then drive off in the vehicle towards the mess hall. The big red grounded tags are supposedly a chargeable offense if removed by anyone other than a mechanic, but no one at my unit would enforce that, especially because one of the drivers was an officer. So I let it go and made sure no one fixed that window. A couple days before the road move home, I saw the list go out. Everyone who drove out in a vehicle was driving it back home. Everyone else was stuffed on buses and overflow had 3 flights home. Sure enough, that officer and his buddy were on one of the flights because their vehicle was grounded and going home on a flatbed. The day before the flights, I went over and screwed some plywood over the window of that vehicle. That informed his chain of command that his vehicle was roadworthy and needed a driver to go home. There were no available flatbeds, I made sure of that. The officer came down all upset to try and get it on a truck anyway, because his flight was tomorrow, but my SGT was well aware of the situation and told him if his vehicle was roadworthy every day to drive him to the mess hall, then it was definitely able to get him home. The look on his face was priceless. 3 days of crap driving to save himself 15 minutes of walking a day. Next one is titled, "Sure, you can ask me to do that again." Backstory: I've always been a tidy person. When I was a kid, I cleaned my room and made my bed with no one telling me I needed to. I picked up the common living areas at home because I wanted to. I've also been a person who does not like doing yard work. Back in the summer when I was 8 years old, my parents asked me to mow the lawn that day while they were at work. Excuse me, WTF. Not only do I not do that kind of work, I had 2 older brothers, 10 and 15, who were the ones to take care of the outside maintenance. I was upset, so I whined, complained, put up a fight. I wasn't going to do it. My mother called throughout the day to remind me to mow the lawn and have it done by the time my parents came home. Ugh, fine. Cue the malicious compliance. I got out the lawn mower, looked at the half-acre of grass, much of it on a hill, and got down to business of doing what I was asked. I haphazardly pushed that mower all over the yard, straight lines veering off into swirls, then diagonal lines, random stopping points in the middle of a row, making shapes, and just made a mess of the yard. I did that on the front, sides, and back. Most of the grass was still uncut. My parents came home and asked me what the hell did I do, how it wasn't okay, it needed to be fixed, they were mad at me, blah blah blah. I looked them straight in the eyes and said, "You can ask me to mow the lawn again, but I'll do the same thing. I don't like it and I clean the inside. Take it or leave it." They left it. Never mowed the lawn again and never did any yard work again. Next one is titled, "Time and Rank." My dad was the chief of a small university police department with about 20 officers working for him. There were 3 ranks below chief, something like corporal, most of them, sergeant, a handful, lieutenant, 1. Greater rank gave greater authority and, nominally, higher pay at the expense of greater responsibility and more paperwork. Seniority within rank was based on how long you had been in your current rank and was mostly used as a tool for selecting preferred ships and overtime. Newest in rank usually ended up working night shift and had no hope of holidays off. This one officer, let's call him Don, was generally a pain in the ass, complained all the time, tried to cut corners, shirked duties, filed grievances that were invariably dismissed as unfounded, got caught smoking at a desk in a no-smoking office while actually playing with the little bronze no-smoking sign that was sitting there. He was a corporal for a long time, eventually near the top of the time in rank list of 15 or so corporals, so generally had his preferred ships, whatever overtime he wanted, etc. Then he decided to take the sergeant's exam, and God bless him, he passed it, and got the rank and the small pay increase, and responsibility and paperwork that came with it. He was also at the bottom of time in rank as a sergeant, which meant a lot of night shifts and holidays, as there were only 4-5 sergeants, but always at least one on duty. After a few months, the responsibility and paperwork chafed him to the point Don asked to be demoted back to corporal. Actually, he demanded to be demoted. The phrase, "this is bullcrap," was used a lot. EFF bombs may have been dropped, and such language was simply not tolerated by the chief. The chief tried to reason with him, tried to explain the full implications of such a demotion, but Don kept cutting him off and demanding to be bumped back down to corporal. The chief stopped arguing and prepared the paperwork, which Don signed a few days later without reading. Note, it was all perfectly normal change in rank paperwork, spelling out the details. There were no special little gems added for Don's benefit. The only difference is that the forms were normally used to change a rank up, not down, and so Don got his wish and was bumped back down to corporal, giving up the authority of a sergeant, but also giving up the responsibility and extra paperwork that he hated. He probably already knew he was giving up the smallest pay increase and went back to his previous salary. What he did not realize, and wouldn't listen when the chief tried to tell him, is that as of the demotion, he became the newest corporal on the list, dead last for time and rank, and was stuck with third shift and holidays and whatever overtime nobody else wanted, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Next one is titled, "A friend of mine pulled over a Freeman-on-the-land." My friend is a police officer, and he pulled over a Freeman-on-the-land. Quick and dirty explanation. Freeman-on-the-land, also Freeman-of-the-land, the Freeman movement, or simply Freeman, are a loose group of individuals who believe that they are bound by statute laws only if they consent to those laws. They believe that they can therefore declare themselves independent of the government and the rule of law, holding that the only true law is their own interpretation of common law. So the guy was speeding, going about 30 over the limit. It was also raining quite hard. My friend pulled him over and asked for the guy's license, insurance, and registration. The guy had none of this. He said he refused to carry those things on him, as he hadn't complied with those provincial laws. He stated his beliefs needed to be respected. After a bit of arguing back and forth, my friend told him he would be getting the vehicle towed and writing a bunch of tickets. Once the tow truck arrived, my friend ordered him out of the vehicle. The man complied because he knew my friend would physically remove him. As the car is being towed, the guy asks for a ride to the detachment about 5 km away so he could call a cab. They are in a rural area. My friend, knowing these guys have very strong feelings against taxes and government, says cheerfully, "Sorry, sir. This car was paid for by taxpayers and is owned by the government. I'm just respecting your beliefs. Have a better day, and please pay those tickets unless you wish to fight them." He then drives off, leaving the guy in the rain. For some reason, it didn't occur to the guy to ask the tow truck driver. There was a sidewalk by the road, so he was good to go. Just was very wet, I'm sure. Last one is titled, "Okay, call the police." Obligatory. This is my father's story, but it's quite a funny one. So when I was born, my father was stationed out in California, and we were living in military housing. This will be important. My grandparents on my mother's side drove all the way from PA to help my parents for a few weeks, since they were new to balancing children and work. My father and grandmother have always had a rocky, at best, relationship. She hit him with her minivan once, more or less intentionally. Well, one day my mom is at work, and she took my grandfather with her. At the time, my father had a Siberian husky named Bear. This is important because my grandmother had recently read an article on why it's not safe to trust pets with newborns. It addressed concerns over the animal being jealous of attention. What ensued was a huge fight between my father and my grandmother about keeping the dog. Now, this dog had risked its life to keep a rattlesnake away from me already, without harm. And it was my father's best friend, so the answer was a hard no from him. Argument turned into a "this is my house" sort of thing, which was when my grandmother threatened to call the police and have my dad arrested for child safety issues. As soon as she said, "I'll call the police," my father gave her a smug look and said, "I dare you," and walked off. Well, she called the police. Keep in mind, it's a military base, so the police that showed up were armed military police. They proceed to do the normal describe the incident type of thing. Now, my dad is a clever guy, he was a SEAL, you kind have to be. He immediately told them, "Well, I dared her to call the police because she didn't like my dog. Bear is cuddling the other officer as they spoke." Well, it's not legal for an adult to call the police on a dare, so they took her into custody and put her in a cell. When my mom got off of work, they resolved the whole thing and they didn't mark my grandmother's record or anything like that. But needless to say, my father and grandmother don't really talk anymore. Thanks for listening.